So, one of the themes of my show is about how the Democrats love to tell you a narrative, love to tell you a story, and how they go about implementing those narratives and those stories. Because the left will go off and tell you one thing, but then when it turns out that there was backlash or that they were wrong, they quickly go through trying to rewrite history, try to rewrite the narrative to whatever is more politically advantageous for the moment. And so a couple of weeks ago now, during the coronavirus press conference, a reporter asked a particular question, and a lot of conservatives caught on to how the question was phrased and, started speculating about what the narrative was going to be. Of course we understand, that it's designed to attack, the whole, when did you stop beating your wife type of question. And I'm going to show you the clip here in a moment. And I'm going to show you that our initial, idea of where they were going to go with the narrative was a little off, was a little wrong. And then I'll go through and tell you what the real narrative is. So let's go ahead and take a look at this clip. And then we're going to go through and discuss what the real narrative is that the Democrats are trying to develop.
Dr. Ashish Shah, who is the head of Harvard's Global Health Institute, says that the key to getting this economy open as soon as possible is to test everyone who needs testing so we can quarantine all infected individuals and allow everyone else to go back to work immediately. Would you subscribe to that strategy?
No, but we have tested more than anybody. I saw him.
And if not, how many deaths are acceptable?
Yeah. How many? None. Okay, how many deaths are acceptable to me? None. Okay, none, if that's your question.
Okay, so look at the way that question was set up. How many deaths are acceptable to you? And this was based off of the conversation on when to open up the economy, being that Trump views the economy more important than lives. So there's a certain amount of deaths that Trump would consider, acceptable in order to preserve the value of the economy. And conservatives, we caught on to the phraseology of that question as when did you stop beating your wife type of question, saying that unless you keep the economy closed forever, people are going to die, and Trump finds that acceptable. But it turns out the narrative is a little bit more than, Trump is callous and doesn't care about lives. That was just the initial setup, and initial testing for the Democrats on how to go about spinning a new narrative, right? So what is that new narrative? Well, the left-wing rags such as Mother Jones, how Donald Trump plans on spinning 200,000 coronavirus deaths as a win. And no, I don't do any editing, so you get the mistakes along with this. So this skill, if it can be called that, it states, was on display at a recent Trump campaign rally, which these days are held daily in the White House, where Trump and members of his coronavirus task force brief reporters and the rest of the world. Trump has been bragging about the ratings for these briefings, cheering his audience members as Americans perish. When Trump at this particular session on Sunday wasn't bashing the media, or when he wasn't bashing the media, belittling his perceived foes, or praising himself, he made a startling remark. So you're talking about 2.2 million deaths, 2.2 million people from this. And so if we can hold that down, and we're saying to 100,000, it's a horrible number, maybe even less, but 100,000. So we have between 100 and 200,000, and we all together have done a very good job. At this briefing, Trump 16 times pointed to the 2.2 million estimate. That number comes from a new British study that Trump health care advisors had shown him that projects this level of death in the unlikely absence of any control measures or spontaneous change in individual behavior. That is, without social distancing, testing, and the like. Trump's experts had put this report in front of him so he would see that his idiotic idea of, to ease social restrictions by Easter would cause hundreds of thousands of deaths. Trump, who on February 26, when there were 15 reported coronavirus cases in the United States, said the number would soon be down to close to zero. Now, go ahead and define what the definition of soon is. Okay, but in any event, was now tossing out a horrendous number. It was quite a turnaround and very purposeful. Okay, so here's what the left's narrative is that they've been trying to develop, and that is any amount of deaths is Trump's fault. No matter what Trump does, it was never enough. And so when the reporter was going out there asking how many deaths are acceptable, and because eventually we're going to have to open up the economy, in order to prevent the total collapse of the country, which would result in a lot more deaths. And we got to balance out, the deaths that will be caused by an economic collapse versus the death of the virus. But the narrative and going through and saying how many deaths are acceptable to you is designed to think that there is a number of people that Trump can, live with dying as a result of the virus. And therefore, in coordination with this Mother Jones article, therefore, he didn't take enough action to protect us because he viewed your life as expendable. That's the narrative. Trump should have taken more action, but he didn't because you were expendable to him in relation to his other priorities and concerns. And no matter how many deaths there are, this was always going to be the narrative. Right? So at the beginning of this entire global outbreak, Trump started taking action back in January, even highlighting the problem of the coronavirus during, this is probably not going to show up in search results now, but oh well. But he went through during the State of the Union address to point out the dangers posed by the coronavirus. And the Democrats were going out there downplaying it. I mean, there's a whole slew of headlines. You can check out a previous video that I've done that shows all the headlines and all the, media outlets that were actually downplaying the threat of the coronavirus, and they were liberal outlets. Even MSNBC and CNN that now claim it was Trump that didn't take it seriously were belittling and downplaying it and saying that Trump, back in January when he enacted travel restrictions and quarantines, were taking things too far. He was overreacting, right? So, and the Democrats, they got this, issue here where no matter what, it's wrong. It's either an overreaction or an underreaction. So no matter what, the decision is always wrong. But in this particular case, now that we see that there's no such thing as underreacting to the threat that the coronavirus poses to the United States and globally, so they can't go off and claim that he's overreacting anymore. So now they're going to come out and say he underreacted, he stalled, he dragged his feet. And he did so because he didn't care about your life. So let's say, based off of the initial models and the initial estimates, that the death toll would have been about, maybe 13 million people, right? That would be the initial estimate here. And let's say he went off and, through his actions and conduct, was able to keep the death under 20,000 people. Well, the media would come out and go, well, that's not good enough. 20,000 people, that's what he considered to be an acceptable loss. That's what he considered, to be, the value of the economy, the price worth paying for the economy. It should have only been half that much or only a quarter that much. Now we're seeing projections of 2.2 million, right? Based off of now having more data and information. So no number is ever going to be good enough. Let's say the death toll hits 200,000. The media is going to come back and say, oh, it should have only been 100,000. Only half as much. If only Trump would have acted sooner, but he didn't because the economy was worth more than you. Or let's say, we do a really great job, and we keep the death, because there's no way to keep the death toll at zero, right? It's too far widespread, and it was widespread before we even knew that it arrived at our shores. It had already started spreading and spreading and spreading and is highly contagious, right? And it's true. You can't necessarily take action, on quarantines of people that you don't know to be infected, right? So by the time the first few cases had already come out, it was already, out of control. and would be impossible to keep that genie in the bottle. But let's say, the job that he does, instead of 200,000 deaths is down to 100,000. Well, the media will come out and goes, well, there's no reason why it was 100,000. No. It should have only been, through effective policy, should have been able to keep that number down to 50,000. Around the, death rate that you would see of the annual flu. And it was only through his incompetence that it got up to 100,000. But then if Trump, has through his policies and actions was able to keep the number down to 50,000, they'd be able to come out and go, well, it should have only been 25,000. So it doesn't matter what the number of death is. The Democrats are always going to say that, it's Trump's fault that more people died than had to die, because Trump didn't act fast enough. Trump didn't act strongly enough. Trump didn't take enough action. Even though the action that he was taking at the very beginning, the Democrats were criticizing and yelling, this is an overreaction. This is going to cause xenophobia and racism. Even as Trump was issuing guidelines and the coronavirus task force was issuing guidelines, starting to talk about social distancing and precautions, the Democrats were out there saying, no, ignore all that. Go to all these public events, go out to eat, enjoy these rallies. Don't change a thing about your life to protect yourself. And there's a lot of videos, and you can check out a previous video I did debunking the left's narrative on that, showing that. So here it is, the Democrats downplayed it and in order to try and attack Trump. And now they're overplaying it in order to attract Trump or to attack Trump. They're always going to say that whatever he did was wrong. Now, let's say this was an overreaction, right? And let's say he shut down the economy. And, it turned out the virus wasn't as bad as everyone predicted. Well, the narrative would still be Trump's actions cost lives. Trump's actions ruined everybody's life because Trump shut down the economy. There was no need to do so. All these people lost their jobs. And as a result, all these people committed suicide. Therefore, Trump's actions, was an overreaction to the virus, caused a lot more death and damage to the country because of the shutdown of the economy. There's no narrative in which they do not attack Trump here. There is no narrative in which what Trump did was right? There is no narrative that, what Trump did, cost more lives than were needed, right? It's always going to be, either Trump didn't do enough to stop the virus, therefore all the deaths are his fault, and even Bernie Sanders has come out and tried to say on an interview with The View that, Trump has the blood of Americans on his hands because of his inaction. And yet we know for a fact that if he had shut down the economy earlier and implemented all of this, they would have not only attacked him for it, but then they would have said the overreaction, if the virus wasn't as bad, was the problem and a sign that he is not fit to lead. But the left, they love these narratives. They love actually not being in any position of actual authority. Because it turns out being in the minority, being in the opposition party, means that you can go out there and just attack with a bunch of phony narratives without having any responsibility to do anything, without being held accountable to anything. And that's one of the benefits of the opposition. You can always criticize every action of your opponent as being wrong and that the results, being disastrous is their fault, no matter what. No matter what, the results were either not good enough or they were horrible. Because the opposition never has any responsibility or accountability for anything because they can always pass the buck. Well, we don't have, authority or control over this. It's one of the things that annoyed me about the Republican Party, way back during the Obama administration. How they would go out there and, they would rightly attack, Obama's policies, because Obama's policies were, in fact, horrible. But they always came up with this excuse not to actually do anything about it. Oh, We can't stall things in the House because we're in the minority. Then they win the House. Oh, we're only 1/2 of 1/3 of government. We just don't have enough authority. So they win the Senate. Well, the executive, the president can veto anything we do. Therefore, what's the point on sending him bills to veto? Because then he looks stronger. And then they get into the position of the majority. They have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. And they only got one actual major piece of legislation through. It took them 1.5 years to actually do anything that they had promised, right? Because they like to drag their feet. They don't actually like to do the whole ruling and governing and all of that. Luckily, Trump does, but none of the career politicians on either side do. They just love being able to go on camera, praise themselves as the champion of the people, and then go out and demonize their political opponents. And of course, as individuals, it's never their fault, never their responsibility. It's always somebody else. Ooh. I don't know why I did. Ooh, I was in the moment. But that's how the Democrats are going to try and spin everything that is going on with the pandemic and, with what's going on, with the economy and all the actions Trump does, is that no matter what Trump did, Trump cost lives. The deaths of Americans are on Trump's hands. Because, well, there was no scenario in which there would be zero loss of life here. And unless there was zero loss of life, then everything is Trump's fault. And that's why the left develops these narratives. So go through and take a look at everything the left is saying, whether it's, politicians on their own live streams. It's interesting to see them now figuring out how to use live stream technology for themselves from inside of their own home, and how these politicians and all these major network late night hosts are suddenly, becoming amateur YouTubers in order to try and stay relevant during this time. It's interesting. They got a long ways to go for it, right? But they're starting to do that in order to keep up these attacks. I'll get to AOC on another video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, the like button, leave me some comments, and share this around. And I will be back again soon.